So, guys, we got to introduce Rob a bit. So, Rob did this to me too, because Rob is the organizer of BasedCon, and Hans writes to me 2 years ago and says, "Come to BasedCon." I'm like, "What's that?" He says, "Well, my friend Rob is making a conference," and we go.
That's pretty much what happened. Yeah, it was just kind of like, my friend Rob is just doing this thing. Okay.
To this mysterious location in Michigan and talk about the craft, which is the reason that I've known how to do things like Kickstarters, and you can see I was obsessed with comics for longer ago, but the advice that you've given us as a community on, sort of how to think about stories and the panels and things that we've had. So I wanted you to come on and give us some background story of the story you're working on right now, and it has crusaders in it and demons.
Yeah, I'm working on this series called the Cross Time Crusade, which is the first book is out, which is called Codex Babylon, and it's kind of I've been describing it to the people who know as sort of the lowbrow version of your project because it's like more just kind of action and jokes and kind of I don't think I have any explosions in this one.
You guys have got to stop underselling yourself. One, because I'll just drag you up into I'm messing with your transform. Just a second. All right. Now it's fixed. Okay.
So I'm good. People can see me enough?
You can see you. You can tell us about your story. And the thing is, you are actually material to what we're trying to do in Draco Chemicus. It's the lowbrow version. Go ahead. Go. It's not the lowbrow version.
Yeah, so it's kind of the lowbrow version. I'm not like underselling it. I'm just saying it's a different. It's less artsy than yours. It's a little more just kind of I don't know. I write books that are just kind of a lot of action and a lot of stuff happening, and kind of the opposite of literary fiction, and violence and clever dialogue, hopefully. So basically, the idea is Cross Time Crusade. There's an organization called Grail, fittingly, which is the modern day kind of heirs of the Knights Templar. And they are looking for a book that is basically supposed to help the world fight back against the demons who are taking over everything. And the demons are the main threat at this point are demons called Whisperers, who are kind of this sort of the demons that we see around us, which is sort of like the in the internet and the marketing and the kind of TikTok and algorithms and UI design and things that are drawing your attention and altering your behavior without you knowing it, and corrupting your mind and your spirit and on a collective level, sort of causing civilizational decay and collapse. So the idea is to fight against that, and supposedly there's this book, which is sort of a MacGuffin that which
I tried to persuade you can't be called Codex, but whatever.
Right, it can't. Well,
it wouldn't be the title. It would be the Liber Babylonis. Come on, do the Latin.
It's too cool, Rachel.
It's too. It sounds better if the Codex Babylon, but it's also sort of.
You see how much advice I give, and they don't take it.
I did go back and change some things because I wanted it because it's called that, but it was not called that at the time, and that's sort of the question: is where did this book originate from? Is it obviously was not the Codex Babylon originally in Babylon. It was not called that in like ancient Babylon. So when did it come to be and who wrote it? And that becomes part of the mystery. And of course, because there's time travel, it gets very convoluted with people doing things before they did other things. And, it gets very, very complicated because cause and effect get switched. So I do some fun things with recursion and cause and effect and stuff, which people who have read some of my other books will know that I like to play with things like that. Causal loops and paradoxes and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so I will say, I've read Rob's done a whole series on angels. I really enjoyed the Mercury books. I mean, we're playing with some of these celestial kind of characters in our story too. That having he is Mercury, right? That's his name, right?
Mercury, yeah.
Yeah, and so that he takes on these kind of planetary characteristics too, which we've played with a bit. He's a mischief maker and a trickster and an angel. And Rob's books are very funny. He's being modest.
Well, I laugh because you talk about like, oh, we need your expertise on angels. I just make stuff up, and I check when I want something that sounds convincing. I go to Wikipedia. I mean, I just like grab. I'm like, oh, angel names. Like Google angel names. Okay, here's one. And then I just kind of like sometimes. I mean, my research on those books was almost non-existent because that was
they're very persuasive.
Part of the fun. Right. It's sort of like high level. It's well done, if I may say, bullshit. It's very convincing bullshit. That's sort of my forte. I just take stuff that like I don't know anything about anything really, but I'm able to convince people that I do. So, and those books in particular are just like pure. And I was just it's very I stitch it together in a very convincing way, so it seems like I know something, but I really don't. I don't know much.
This is you're explaining your spell case. If we stitch together narratives that are sound convincing, people will believe them. Gee,
yes,
that's dangerous.
That's it's true.
Rob, I have to acknowledge that I learned some fascinating things about quantum mechanics from Schrodinger's cat. So that was
that one did actually require some research. I mean, I'm not smart enough to like really understand the physics and stuff. I mean, like physics. The philosophical stuff I have fun with, but the actual physics and particles and waves and stuff and how they interact is kind of over my head. But yeah, that one later on I did do some books where I did a little research, and like the Iron Dragon books are very historical. I did a lot of reading for those on the Vikings and medieval history and stuff. And the current series is kind of in between, where I'm making it also I ground it very much in history, or I try to. And actually Rachel was helpful. She was one of the people who read it and caught a few things that I got
one
of
the things I was complaining is like, that's not a horse's name.
Right. Well, part of the problem was I had names of people that I had to use for the Kickstarter, and I was like, well, I was like, well, how do I fit this person's name in there? And I'm like, well, I could change what this horse's name. And then Rachel's
that's
like,
not a horse's name.
I forget what it was. You
can't just name them anything. These names matter, right? They have.
It's like, no, you can't have a horse named that. And I was like, yeah, I didn't really like it either, so I changed it again. But yeah, so I have these. It gets tricky because I have these, and I actually finally I have Rachel's character. There's a character who's modeled after you in the book that finally it didn't make it in the first one, but she's in the second one, and she's kind of a badass. So that's
excellent. Good. She did sword? No, don't tell me. So
there is a sword. She doesn't get to use the sword, sadly. So it's kind of a little bit of a tease because it's like a Chekhov's gun thing where it's like the sword shows up, but then she doesn't get to behead anybody with it or anything. But I thought, well, she said she wanted a sword, so I'll put a sword in. But I don't know if people are going to be disappointed that you don't actually use the sword. So
okay, well that sounds an interesting storytelling technique. Set things up that you don't in fact use.
Right. Well, it's a little, it's a bit of a tease, but it is kind of a good thing to do once in a while, because then people, you keep them guessing, because it's like, well, he did do that thing where he just had a sword that showed up for no reason. So does this mean something? And then they're surprised sometimes when like things to come together. It's like, oh, that really did, he really was hinting at something, but so once in a while you throw them some curveballs, some red herrings, and then they never know what to expect. Kill off a character once in a while, just totally at random, and then people don't know. They don't know
well, yes.
they don't
Then
know what you're
I'm
gonna
the
do.
sort of person that looks at the back of the book to see whether your favorite character has been murdered or not by the author. And if it has, I quit. Right? So I'm like,
Yeah,
get that.
I kill a lot of characters.
Oh no!
I do.
This is my main reason.
So far in this series, well, no, there are a few people who die in this, in this series too. So it gets.
Are you gonna
it's kind
kill
of
me
grim, but
after this?
I don't.
Better not
I don't
kill
know.
me.
We'll find out.
I won't give you more hints about
Probably
horses.
Some people like to be killed in the books, but I probably won't.
Oh, but we won't know. We won't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a huge planner, so I have kind of a general idea of where the books are going to go. Well, I always have an outline for the book and for the series, and I always think, okay, this is pretty good. This will work. And then as I'm writing, that I never follow the outline. Like I start writing it, and then I'm just like, oh, what would be even better is this. And I always come up with something I like more than what actually happened in the outline. So I never really know for sure what's going to happen, because you get, halfway through the book and you realize, oh, this character wouldn't do that, or this or this doesn't, this is a plot hole, this doesn't make sense, this isn't convincing, or whatever. And so people end up doing things that other than what you would expect, and events unfold in other ways than you had planned, and it always works out some way or another, but after banging your head against the wall a little bit. But I never, it is kind of part of the fun though, because I never know either where things are going. So like, hopefully that I can sort of transfer that experience to the reader, where they're like, where is this going? Because that's definitely what I'm doing as I'm writing it.
But what triggers this change? Is your story responding to things that are happening around you in real time, or is it the story? Are you kind of participating with it, and it's setting you off in different ways? Like,
yeah, it's usually sometimes it's just like plot holes, things where I'm like, oh, this person would have had the chance to do this earlier, and so it doesn't make sense that they do this action. But a lot of times it's the characters themselves who I had them, I plan to have them do something, and then I realize at that point in the book where they have to do that character wouldn't do that thing, and I can't get them to do it. So I'm like, okay, it doesn't feel right for them to do that thing, or just like it feels like something that's supposed to happen because of the plot, and not something that the character would do, and that's just death for a book, because then it's just like you're pulling the reader totally out of it, and they can see the strings, they can see that you're making things happen that are supposed to happen, and now the characters aren't real people anymore, they're just marionettes doing what the author wants them to do. And sometimes there are things that come up in research too, where I'm like, I learn things where there are historical events or something where I learn, oh, this event would be really, really cool to link in with the action. And I could, instead of having this character, like as an example, I have, it just so happens that in the current book that I'm working on, the second one in the series, this character has to get from France to the Holy Land, basically. Because this has to happen a lot, because he time travels back to France, and then they have to get to Jerusalem or Egypt or whatever. And it just so happens that very close to the time that this character has to get there, there's this fleet that's leaving from Venice to go east, and it's very convoluted, but they're basically waging war against the Byzantine Empire and the Muslims at the same time, and they can't really decide which one they want to do more. But then they kind of get distracted by one on the way to the other, which is kind of hilarious to me. Which is like, we're going to go to fight the Muslims, but also we really hate these Greeks, so we're going to have to stop and attack them we siege them for like a year on the way.
This
so
is actually historically accurate. So.
Yes, this is actually stuff that happens, and and another cool thing is that like I have this character. This is like total nerdy writer stuff, but like I have this character he is trying to find now in the second book, find the guy who was looking for this book in the first book, and he ends up teaming up with these Templars who are trying to save King Baldwin II, who is in captivity in, I guess I guess it would be Turkey, somewhere in the Turkish territory. So he's going along with them to do this one their mission, but he wants them to go along with him after that to get this guy Cormac as part of his mission. So this parallels this crusade, this Venetian crusade, where they have two kind of competing goals, and that's the kind of stuff that just happens by act of like you have this Venetian crusade that's going to go do one thing, but on the way they're going to have to do this other thing, and then while I'm writing this, I have this character who is going to do one thing, and he ends up teaming up with these guys who are on the way doing another thing. So it's this nice kind of analog parallel between these two things. And it's just cool stuff that happens like that as you're writing, and it's weird when stuff like that comes together, but it's a lot of fun because it feels like you're tapping into something that's like that's more than like I didn't come up with this. This somehow happened as a result of this process that I'm not fully in charge of, and that's part of the fun of it, because I can't possibly plan out the whole book, because I would never come up with something like that on my own, with that sort of parallel between these two missions, and it's just a cool part of the process.
Well, so I know that we're working as a group. There are 4 of us that are doing the writing together, and it is interesting. I mean, Kiltz is often the one that's doing this. It's like we write a line and she says, "No!" We're like, "What?" She's like, "That, no, it doesn't sound right." And the thing is, you're always right. Although sometimes I fight you on that, but it is
Latins versus Greeks.
it's interesting the how that.
No, it's never a conscious thing either. It's just like it hits. It's like a gut feeling, and then I think no, it's just not sitting. It's not sitting, and until it sits and it fits, it's almost like when we're writing these stanzas, it clicks into place, and I'm like, okay, this is not annoying me anymore. That's kind of like, that's like it's not so much like, oh, this is fantastic. That comes after. It has to not annoy me, and then I can enjoy it. And that's what I do to them pretty much every day, and they put up with me.
Which I know.
It makes me think of that.
Yeah.
Makes me think of that video of the woman who's watching this guy put the shapes into the toy. You see that, where he's like, nobody's gonna know what I'm talking about, where he's got like a square, and she's like, okay, now put it in the square one, and he puts it
like
in
those baby plastic toys.
He puts it in like the circle, and she's like, no, that's not right. And she's like freaking out more and more, because he's like, oh, it's like the crescent shape, and she's like, okay, put it in that one. He's like, he puts it in the same, like the circle one again, and they all fit in the circle, and he just keeps putting them in the circle, and she's like getting more and more agitated as she's watching him. That's sort of what I think of it's like, that doesn't fit, make it stop.
Yeah.
And then you finally, you do it right, and it's like,
okay. Well, I feel about that about history, and so when people give the wrong names to horses, that there's, I mean, this I'd never occurred to me like this. It's like when I'm reading, historical fiction or something like that, and there will be things that just don't fit, and usually what I'm thinking is it's a matter of style or language or details of, but so I do actually understand this reaction, because you're just saying, no, my sensitivity as a historian to anachronism or wrongness is that sense of this doesn't fit with anything else that was going on that I know about the way people talked, or the kinds of decisions that we'd make, or the way they use their language, or so it's funny that, Rob, when I was reading your draft, I was not annoyed by most of it, which is yes. It's like
well, it's very difficult to get into that mindset of, like the medieval mindset, because it's like, it's really easy to like I mean, relatively easy to get the basic historical facts right as far as events and places and even technology and like clothing and stuff. But just the way to get into the mindset of how people thought and talked to each other, and just acted because it's so different from our the way we talk and interact and think about things today, that it's, I mean, you almost have to be somebody who's immersed in the study of history like you. Like, I'm not going to get there by reading 10, 20 books, because I'm not going to be able to immerse myself at that level. So I rely on people like you to basically say, no, that feels wrong.
But okay, so it's like, I was just looking back at your text and remembered, I really enjoyed the way you set up the Whisperers, and because that sense of the demonic in the communications is one of the things that we're definitely working with. That feeling of either the media itself creates this environment in which we are changed by the artifacts, but that there's also that worry that we have. We can go to AI now, right? And you brought John Cormack to our he's coming back. We're gonna have to fight him on this, right? It's the when you're imagining yourself into the angels or the presence of these demons, and you were mediating between me and John in the conversation. I was saying these are demons that he's describing in the way in which they're playing up in the AI, and you're like, no, I don't think they are. Where are you now in that feeling? Because we're talking about characters that give you a sense that they know what they're doing, and we know we're inventing those characters. We were talking with Chuck about, I like these characters, I like getting into these characters. How much are these demonic, angelic influences in us or outside?
Yeah, I really don't know, but what I would say, and I leave this question kind of open in the book too, as far as like how much are these things real outside of us, and how much are they something that's inside of us, and that we're creating. That is kind of a recurring idea in the book that never, well, so far at least, hasn't really gotten settled. But to me, and I don't want to give away too much of where I'm going with these books, but I would say that I'm pretty much right in the middle between you and John, because he's very much kind of pragmatically oriented, like, oh, these are just tools, they can be good and bad, but mostly technology is good. And you're like, no, back away. This is very, dangerous stuff. I'm very much in the middle where, like, look, these things are obviously more than just tools that we that it's not a hammer. It's something that's potentially it can transform society and in strange, in unexpected ways. And we may be dealing with other minds, either not necessarily possibly in a literal, even at least in sort of a allegorical or metaphorical sense, other minds. But my feeling is that in general, other minds are not a bad thing. I mean, like, if aliens came to visit us, I wouldn't immediately think to myself, these creatures, these aliens from another planet are working for Satan, and they want to destroy me. I mean, that would definitely be a possibility. But my first thought would be, these are beings, intelligent beings, presumably created by at some level, created by the same God that created me, and I can communicate with them, and we should have things in common. And they probably are susceptible to the same sort of corruption or other sorts of corruptions, but they also have the potential for good. And I think that more intelligence and more freedom are generally good things, and they can result in bad things, but I don't think we necessarily need to be afraid of them.
Well, you've just given a very accurate description of the problem of angels and demons.
Right.
I mean, because indeed they're creatures. I mean, it's like they're no aliens, right? They're angels or they're demons, right? But that they are and that is in the medieval conception, they're intelligences that seem to be able to communicate with us because they're messengers of some sort. And that's why I liked your Mercury books, because he's a messenger of some sort. And that if you say they're, susceptible to fall, that is the great mystery. I mean, it's the great scholastic theological mystery. It's like, why did they fall when they're there praising God, right? Why would they ever turn and do something else? And that's our problem always too, right? Why would we, and you have this. May I read some of Codex Babylon? Is that okay? Sure. It's published, right? It's out. So it's fair game. That's out there. It's not this. Yep. So you have them, they're talking about Grail and they're talking about the demons. And Gabriel, you also have angel names in there. She's saying there are many kinds of demons and we don't fully understand any of them. We know that at least some of them are more or less semantic entities, that is, sentient beings made up of words, which is an interesting sort of, like our verbal work with the poem, right? It's like, how much are we making, how much you conjure reality by words. But we've only come to understand some of the implications of that very recently, as the flow of information has accelerated manifold. Martin says, you're talking about the internet, Gabriel. Yes, phone lines, radio broadcasts, wireless communication, AI text generators, many different technologies which have combined to exponentially increase the volume and velocity of images and written and verbal communications being created and transmitted. We've created the perfect incubator for semantic organisms. That was cool, right? It's like, and it's like, it's the media problem we're working with in our Mosaic Arc, our live streams, and in Draco Alchemicus, which is like that it's fascinating. You've made Codex Babylon the original, like, home of these semantic entities, which are demons, which are in fact generated by all of our communications. So there's this, the Marshall McLuhan problem of the degree to which simply by our media, our communication technologies, we are creating an environment in which these things exist to act on us.
Right.
And that your whisperers seem to really participate in that insight of how we are affected by our communication networks. And that you took it back to the Middle Ages. Of course, it's from books, right? It's like books do it too. It's not just the AI.
Right. Yeah, it's and it's kind of going back to going back to the source, which is literacy. Literacy and the sharing of ideas and of books.
Right.
And of course, some of this is also borrowed from or kind of copied and sort of tweaked a little bit from Stephenson's Snow Crash, where that's one of the my brain now, and I've lost.
You said you gave us 30 minutes, and now you're shifting to writer mode again, right?
Yeah, I'm just like my brain just went. One of the inspirations for Cross Time Crusade was Snow Crash, because he goes very much back like to the I forget what the civilization is that in his books, where it's like there's these sort of there's this kind of linguistic programming that's like sort of low level sort of the operating system of the human brain that's kind of be hacked by these kind of ancient writings stuff. And so that was a cool idea. So that's sort of borrowed from that. So.
Well, we're in it. We're all in it, right? It's not like we're all borrowing from each other all the time, right? And and it's definitely, it's real. There's definitely this happens to some degree. We're all being manipulated by these things, these beings that exist, and it's kind of pointless to deny that they exist in some sense. I think. What I did and what fiction, at least the kind of fiction that I do usually does, is sort of ramp up the level of conflict and make things maybe a little more literal and a little more obvious than they are in reality, so you can see things more clearly and expose the contrasts and the juxtapositions between things. So these things exist,
but maybe they're not going to be. It's not going to come together in as dramatic a conflict as they will in the books that I write or the stuff that you're working on. But the questions and the conflicts are definitely still very real.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that we're all working. So we were trying to convince Chuck that he was writing highbrow, and we'll do it to you too, but later. But it's mythology at this level of understanding these, and whatever it is we're trying to describe, the divine, the spiritual, the angelic and demonic seem to operate on that sense of we feel like we're in a system that has effects on us, but it doesn't feel like it's creator level, but there's something else, and we're trying to. I mean, in Draco Alchemicus, we're trying to show the interaction between the actual like magic science of the spell casting and the people's response to it, which is also, I think, in your story, that these demons don't do it on their own. That we have to participate with them.
Right. Yeah. And one of the interesting things too about sort of between the this gets back to the highbrow versus sort of lowbrow thing is that one of the things about like I'm no like literary fiction, but it seems like one of the main distinctions between that and more like action oriented kind of lowbrow fiction is that the conflicts in literary fiction, more highbrow stuff, are more internalized and they're more psychological. But then it's interesting because then you get into this, you start getting to the more psychological, and you get into all these archetypes and Oedipus and the gods and stuff, and then that brings you back out into the external, right? Because that's like these are like external. You have all these gods with like, I mean, they're basically superheroes. They're pre ancient superheroes. They're all these guys that have powers that are lightning bolts and stuff, and they're fighting monsters and things, and it's exactly the same thing as like Marvel superheroes or whatever. So it's like you get internal enough with this stuff, and then you get into the real mythological stuff and the archetypes, and that brings you right back out into external stuff where you have demons and monsters fighting each other. So it ends up all being kind of, I think it's sort of an artificial distinction.
You just succeeded in highbrowing yourself, so congratulations.
Exactly. I just bullshitted my way into being a highbrow artist.
See, and no, the thing is, you did, because I did a course on virtues and vices, and the primary sort of way to describe the problem of the virtues and vices is, guess what? Fancy word, psychomachia, which is allegorizing the virtues and vices into basically superhero contests.
Yep. There you go. See,
we're all doing the same thing.
I know this stuff.
As long as we're doing this like real problem of virtue and vice and justice and mercy, we're writing good stuff, hopefully. Well, Rob, I appreciate.
Yeah, because that's the thing, is that it's different genres, but we're all grappling with the same
Or this
stuff,
is what makes good stories, that we're actually grappling at this level with these.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Hopefully, yeah.
Okay, so I promise you promised that I wouldn't keep you forever and take you from your writing, because you need to get back to it. Yes.
Yeah, I have to.
He wants to go and kill somebody.
I have to
go and kill someone off now.
I'm almost done with this book. It's actually it's going to be a little shorter than the last one, so I'm really close to being done. But later this week, Hans and I are getting together at LibertyCon down in Chattanooga, and so I have to get on the road on like Wednesday. So I really wanted to get this thing to the beta readers before that, and so yeah, I've got a tight deadline.
Okay,
so.
go off and write your highbrow literature.
I will say literature. The other thing is that you guys have to help me with is, and I didn't get a chance to talk to Chuck. I just saw him for a minute there, but we need to get him at BasedCon. I've been trying. He kind of was. I said that he might last year, and then it didn't work out. Or he said he wasn't doing any cons that year, and then I emailed him this year. And anyway, we need to get him to BasedCon.
You can tell him I'll be there.
You'll be there, and Hans is always there.
Yeah,
and...
I mean, I'm a draw.
For sure. You're I'm gonna go back. You're like our highbrow, academic draw. we have all these like nerdy, these like rocket scientists and sci-fi people like Hans, but we have like a dozen of them, and we only have one of you. So you're a key component.
See,
of
I mean, just tell Chuck I'll be there and he'll come. No. We'll talk more comics.
BasedCon, September 8 to 10, Grand Rapids, Michigan. So basedcon.com.
We will promise when we put this video up, we'll put everything in the links, so people will come to our things. And so we already have, Casey is saying, I've heard a 60-second description of Codex Babylon and I already want to read it. So
nice.
There you go.
It's a lot of fun. It's like Foucault's pendulum if it had more like I don't know, shooting and chase scenes and stuff. Yeah.
Foucault's pendulum is one of those books where you get to the end of it and you go, what did I just read? Now I'm mad.
Yeah. Well, Name of the Rose is kind of like that too, where it's kind of like he's just kind of screwing with you the whole time.
Yes.
But it's fun to go along with it. On the ride. I like those.
I like Name of the Rose better than Foucault's. Foucault's pendulum left me like pissed off at Foucault at Echo, going, that was a giant joke. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
I liked it, but
go finish your book. Thank you very much for coming and hanging out with us.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you, Rob.
We'll see you in a few weeks.
Okay, good.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Rob.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Hans.
Okay. Your slides are up. You guys need a break. I need a break. I need some more wine. Talk to Hans Kiltz.
Hans!
Well, I wanted to ask Rob a few questions, but we kind of ran out of time. But the thing that really
we do 3-hour streams just with the two of us. You think I can carry on?
Well, what really impressed me, and this is a common factor in both Codex Babylon and in Draco Alchemicus, is I started off with my Lockean tabula rasa, man is a rational being, perspective on humanity, and that was reinforced by everything I learned from economics about Adam Smith and hidden hands and so forth. But it's become increasingly evident the extent to which that free will is subverted by very sophisticated techniques that are applied to persuade people and propagandize people and nudge people to the desired behaviors, the desired thought patterns that the nudgers and the propagandists are trying to push you into. So I think that works like Codex Babylon and Draco Alchemicus that explore those kinds of issues, what are the tickets that we're being offered and tempted with, those are very timely and very valuable insights to try to acquire and understand in the present context.
You're doing a better pitch for our work than we do. So what
that was amazing.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, good. Oh, we're recording. Good. We can recover that later. So you've had some adventures yourself with kickstarting, and also it's interesting you're saying that you're now persuaded by our sort of spiritual travails, because it seems to me like most of your characters get caught up in pretty powerful deceptions one way or the other. So in advertising our discussion tonight, I said you're the author of The Hidden Truth, which I loved, and I said The Hidden Truth, but there's actually 3 books, and they get even more exciting. And by the end of it, either my historical sense is off, or Hans is a time traveler who has gone back and figured out exactly why we're in the situation. I seriously could not tell the difference between the parts that you were putting in because of your knowledge of the history of science and the stuff that your characters were dealing with.
Well, Rob was alluding to that as well. It's just fascinating how history ends up being more spectacular and puzzling and quixotic than anything. Any author who made up stuff like that, it would all be considered ridiculous. But things like that really do happen, and the key to making a really good conspiracy theory is all of the most unlikely and improbable stuff. That's the stuff that really happened. And then you make very, mundane, very obviously rational and commonplace explanations to kind of tie together the incredible, unbelievable events, and then have readers go and research or Google up the events and realize, oh my goodness, that all really happened, and it really
it's spooky.
Does a good job. It gets readers into the story. In a way, my last book was in 2017, and I had already outlined the final book, A Hell of an Engineer, and I had this long sequence on irregularities in the process by which we choose the leaders in our democratic republic. And I will go further into using specific trigger words on that. But the thing is that then all that really happened in 2020 and on a scale that far exceeded the fictional version that I was busy
history
so
overridden.
I'm not sure whether, I'm not sure whether to be upset that I didn't keep my nose to the grindstone and get that book out so that I could have been considered a prophet, or glad that reality gave me so much more, way above and beyond anything I would have dreamed possible if I had written it beforehand. So it's going to be an interesting challenge to carry that forward.
Well, why don't you start by telling us about your current adventure? And you promised to tell us about your current adventure, and you promised you're going to talk to us some about the countercultural appropriation, because that goes more into our fairy tale.
Sure. Well, my current project is The Wise of Heart, and about a year ago, I was watching the old movie Inherit the Wind. Actually, I was watching a TV movie version of it, not the 1960s movie version that's probably more famous. And, Inherit the Wind is the classic story of how progressive, enlightened, evolutionary science triumphed over the primitive, superstitious, religious, hillbillies of backcountry Tennessee who were acting in opposition to it. Now, of course, it's based on the real life history of the Scopes monkey trial, where Tennessee passed the Butler Act in the 1920s to forbid the teaching of evolution or any theory that denied the divine account of creation. And that led to some locals in Dayton, Tennessee, who decided to try to come up with a test case, and that test case attracted national attention, with Clarence Darrow, one of the most famous defense lawyers in the country, assisting in the defense, and William Jennings Bryan, who was a several-time candidate for president as well as Secretary of State under Wilson, who ended up assisting the prosecution in the case. Well, I was watching the movie, and I just had this epiphany that this would make a wonderful story if I brought it up to date and if I flipped the script, because of course today it is the progressive advocates of transgenderism who are in defiance of biological science. So the premise of my story, the premise of The Wise of Heart, is a high school teacher wants to participate in a test case to challenge the Gaia Act, the Gender Awareness in Academia Act, which forbids any teaching of biological theory of sex and sex determination, and mandates a unquestioning gender affirmation. So it's effectively the Scopes trial, but brought up to date in a context of transgenderism. And like in the Scopes trial, if you look at the next slide, you have a media circus amid public controversy. There's two prominent, entirely fictional senators, but senators that will look very familiar to viewers of the contemporary scene, who join in the prosecution of the biology teacher and also join in his defense. And of course, one of the key aspects of the real life Scopes monkey trial was the media sensation.
Yeah.
So I kind of adopted the device of a Greek chorus-like media circus at the beginning or near the beginning of each chapter, where all the pundits go ahead and tell you what you just saw and what you just read in that last
I love those
chapter.
chapters. It's like, because you don't even, I can't, it's not even parody, right? It's like
well, that's one of the
it's
problems.
Yes.
That's one of the problems of being a contemporary observer of politics. You know, if you ever rank satire or parody on a historical scale, anything that's written in our time period is going to have asterisks next to it, because it's not really parody if you just have to copy what they're saying and repeat it back verbatim. But that makes my job as a satirist or a parodist that much easier, because all I have to do is isolate some of the more extreme snippets of conversation and thought and public statements and so forth, and just meld them all together, and the parody writes itself.
It's scary. It really is scary.
So the media circus has a number of figures who will be recognizable to anyone who's surveyed or is familiar with the contemporary political scene. One thing that was kind of fun is I included H.L. Mencken's writings. He was the famous reporter who also made it in as a caricature in Inherit the Wind, who really egged on Clarence Darrow and the pro-evolution side, and he was the critical figure behind the defense strategy of, instead of attacking the law, they went to attack the man. They went specifically after William Jennings Bryan, and kind of an early instance of the Alinsky rule of personalizing it, isolating it, and going after the individual instead of keeping the debate and discussion on the abstract level. But the fascinating thing was just striking out evolution and putting in transgenderism and making some light edits. All the reporting he had worked perfectly in my story. It had a
talking about history rhyming, right? It's like
oh, absolutely. And a lot of his writing, it has a little bit of an archaic sound to a modern ear, but the ideas and the content out of it are just spot on and applicable to the kind of the craziness that we're going through. One of my favorite quotes is that where he said something to the effect that the purpose of government is to keep the populace in a fearful and alarmed state so that they may be more easily led. And we have certainly seen that in spades the last few years.
Well, this is clearly why you got kicked out of Kickstarter.
Well, that brings us to the next slide where I can go through that. Because, of course, the crowdfunding saga was almost as much of an adventure as the story itself.
You're milking this.
Well, I knew that anything talking about transgenderism in anything other than glowing and uncritical terms was liable to be a bit controversial.
You do nothing of the sort. You quote accurately everything people are talking about. I don't know what they're worried about.
Exactly. But one of the things that was so interesting about it is, if anything, I think I have presented a better, more logically rigorous argument and case and defense of the transgenderist position than anything I was able to find. Because all the stuff I was able to find was just, it would have looked like a straw man, and like I was just making up a straw man to tear it down. So I had to do my best to steel man the argument and to present a credible defense of it. But of course, Kickstarter, interestingly enough, approved the project with the click of a mouse. I mean, I had it up, I said submit for review, and out popped your project is approved. So I don't think a human being looked at it. They probably have some algorithm that says, oh, this is a topic that we want to promote, so go right ahead and crowdfund this. But then I started, I got set a $3,000 goal to help cover the art, that art that you saw by Ellen Chansey. That's a sample of some of the art that's in the story. I have always wanted to do a graphic novel, and this was my way of getting my feet wet. There's too much courtroom discussion where graphic novel treatment really wouldn't work, but I did want to have illustrations and kind of start my way along that process of getting familiar with putting pictures in books. And that's why I did the crowdfunder. I got my $3,000 funding goal, which is enough to prepay all the art that was in the book. And I set a goal for an audiobook at $6,000. And I was starting to get some publicity from Bounding into Comics and other places. And Kickstarter canceled it. I got the generic, oh, you are in violation of community rules for one or more of the following long list of reasons why you may have transgressed. And, with no information, clearly someone complained, but, they wouldn't share anything about the nature of the complaint or the specific reason, just, the vague, community standards, and you're canceled. And, I had half expected that. In fact, I had my roll of rainbow-colored duct tape ready to go ahead and shoot a picture to do the comparison and show how the fictional story
had manifested itself in the world again.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was just like the hero of my story, who is silenced for teaching the biology of sex in defiance of the transgenderists' dictums. The same thing kind of happened to me. And I had the $4,000 worth of pledges yanked out from underneath me. But fortunately, there's a site called Fund My Comic. I can't say enough good things about them. They got, within a day, I was back up, and most of my Kickstarter backers, when they found and figured out what happened, came and backed at even higher levels. I got some amazing publicity. Even Fox News and The Blaze covered the story, and people were outraged enough that even people who knew nothing about my story came and backed, which is just it's a wonderful change. There was a time where if you were canceled because you were hateful or intolerant, people would say, well, gee, I didn't see that, but maybe there's something to that, and I want to distance myself because I certainly don't want to be regarded as hateful and intolerant. But that card has been played so many times that it's no longer effective. In fact, I did a post on my Substack at wiseofheart.substack.com where I pointed out canceled by Kickstarter has become the new banned in Boston. It used to be Boston had very high standards for what was regarded as decent. So if you were banned in Boston, that work was really spicy and salacious, and therefore, you got a big market boost. Well, canceled by Kickstarter has become more or less the same kind of thing these days. So I ended up with well over double what I had when I was canceled by Kickstarter. I've already ordered all of the books for all of the backers, and unfortunately, I've got to run off to LibertyCon instead of starting the fulfillment. But I should have some books to sell to people, some additional backers copies that I'll sell at LibertyCon if anyone looks me up Saturday evening on the Author's Alley there. It's been quite an adventure trying to push the story through, but it looks like it's a success, and the book should, I'm letting the backers have their copies first. But as soon as I get the backers' copies distributed to them, I'll wait a week or two, and then I'll open it to the public, and you'll be able to buy the book on Amazon.
So that's a story, a crisis and happy ending. Yeah, we like that we live our stories constantly. Well,
that does seem to happen.
But
yes.
I mean, that's actually, it's like we want what Chesterton's thing about, you have stories with dragons because you need, practice against them. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it was people. I was really touched by how many people reached out to me to see, are you okay? I mean, you've been canceled. Are you feeling okay? Are you going to be able to get through this? And my reaction was, I was expecting something like that. I mean, they clearly, they took me by surprise, and I wish they'd picked a day I didn't have so many meetings at work where I could have gotten myself back up and running even faster. But you know, you think ahead and plan, and you know, you're good to go. I mean, there were a few things that I did not correctly anticipate. So if I were going to look at the after action report, one thing is I had promised all my backers, hey, I will put you in my book. I'll put your name and acknowledge you personally as a backer of my project. Well, then I had a couple people say, you know, I have a sensitive job. I really don't want, you know, anyone to associate me with it, just for fear there might be repercussions. And I realized, well, I can't do that anymore because of all the controversies.
Right.
So then there was a mess of trying to figure out who didn't mind being listed. And I had to just go on the policy of, well, you've got to specifically ask me, otherwise I'm not going to put you in the book. So
what you're telling us is art is dangerous.
It can be.
You wanted
people can suffer personal consequences for their art.
You wanted to talk to us about spoliation, and
oh, you're making me get
I'm making you keep the schedule here.
Sure. Well, I didn't realize why this whole idea struck me as just being such a cool thing to do at the time, and why I was so inspired by it, until I read an essay. And you can switch to the
I'm there
slide
now, yeah.
with okay. This just brilliant essay that you know, Alexander Macris, who has a Substack on the contemplations of, on the Tree of Woe. He wrote this article like back in 2021 on the spoliation of pop culture, and he pointed out historically, conquerors have always wiped out and, you know, trampled upon the culture of the people that they have conquered. You know, historically, the Christians, when they took over the pagan cultures, they pulled down the pagan idols, they covered up the, you know, the pagan depictions, and they turned the pagan temples into the church. So, you know, one day it was the pantheon worshiping all gods, the next day it was a cathedral worshiping the one God. And that same pattern is what's happening in our culture today, where the woke have effectively won the culture war and are busy putting their stamp upon all of our cultural icons, upon our superheroes. You know, they're rewriting our movies. You know, movies that we liked, you know, in our youth, like Ghostbusters. Well, that has to be redone in a woke version. We have to take, you know, Star Wars, the heroic story of the young farm boy from the remote hinterland who through hard work and struggle and a little bit of skill and talent with the Force manages to become a great hero.
No, Star Wars is the Fairy Queen. We've covered that.
Oh, okay.
No, I mean for real, it is. It's we have an article out there, as not that we wrote, but that we found, where it's clear that the entire plot structure of Star Wars is in fact the same story that we're rewriting, as it were, with Draco Alchemicus. Haha.
Oh, that's an interesting observation. But, you know, Alexander Macris is a military historian, and he really hit the nail on the head when he pointed out it's Sun Tzu applied to intellectual property. Because, you know, Sun Tzu said a wise general forges on the enemy. And that's exactly what the woke despoilers of culture are doing. They're taking all of the built up generations of good art and reworking it, putting their stamp on it, and making that art tell their stories and their lessons and their morals, and then, you know, inflicting that art on the rest of us.
Well, so this came up a bit in our discussion with Chuck, because you're sort of, now that I understand, horror and comedy are the same in sense of justice and empathy with the characters and things like that, and that therefore is different from this spoliation of, I mean, that horror and comedy are actually within the story structure world that we recognize as true, good, and beautiful. Whereas, so therefore horror is an interesting thing. It's intimately just, interestingly. Whereas this spoliation as I mean, it feels desecration. It feels like a desecration, and that's the interesting thing.
Yeah, it is an affected, well, to the extent that you are spoliating a, good and virtuous culture, yes, it is a desecration.
I was about to say it's like the Babylonian invasion of Judah. They carry off all the holy things from the temple. They spoil everything, literally, and then take off all of the intellectual class back to Babylon, because of course they have to make sure that the guardians of that intellectual and spiritual culture are absorbed into the new conquering Babylonian. Right. So it fits a very ancient pattern. Yeah.
So it's been interesting for me as an observer of the culture war, and you can go to the next slide. We had Gamergate 10 years ago, where a journalist, basically what happened is there was a female gamer who wrote a game called Depression Quest, which is kind of a text game, and a lot of people were wondering why this was getting such glowing reviews when it really was like 80s vintage technology text adventure stuff. And then I guess her boyfriend made the claim that she had been sleeping with journalists for reviews, and that inspired a lot of controversy, where on the one side people were arguing it, decrying the lack of integrity in game journalism, and others took up the cry that, oh, that's just misogyny and you don't like the fact there's a woman gamer here. Really, it was just gamers just wanted to play games without being lectured to about woke morals and having the woke philosophy shoved down their throat. And then that kind of intruded into science fiction as well, as a number of prominent science fiction authors realized it was always the same gang that were getting the Hugo Award, which was considered to be the imprimatur of the highest quality science fiction. And they realized it was the same clique just awarding themselves the books, and decided to start participating in that. And of course, that clique and their backers got all upset that anyone else was trying to do their own slates and their own recommendations. And Rabid Puppies took that one further and really did a good job burning the Hugos to the ground by showing what a mockery of it had become, and forcing them to no award all of the recommendations. But all of that really, that's basically, there's been a tendency of people to just want to be left alone and make our own art without having woke ideology shoved down our throat. And that's certainly a noble goal. And there are a lot of people doing, making very good art, people Chuck Dixon, Rob Kroese, and so forth. If you go to the next slide, there's Archaven, where a lot of great comic art is coming out. I mean, there are multiple strips that are publishing every day, doing new episodes. You can read my story, The Wise of Heart. I'm serializing it there. Chuck Dixon has a number of titles that are serialized there. There are any number of just excellent comic strips that are being produced there. On the next slide, a couple times a year, I do a based book sale. And it was really amazing to me how that, I used to just read classic science fiction, and every few years I'd go back and reread the same books over again. But when I started getting involved in the indie author scene and started writing my own books, I realized there's just a wealth of books out there. Every 3 times a year, I'm putting out a list of 100 to as many as 200 books. And those books are all free or 99 cents. A lot of times they're the first book in a series. So if you find one you like, there's another 3 or 4 or even a dozen books in that same series that you can go after and read and enjoy. So there's just a wealth of good art out there. But again, it's really not, it's not enough on the next slide. It's really not enough to just write good stories and encourage people to come and read them in an era when there is that spoliation of culture. And if you want to do a counter spoliation, what you have to do is do unto the woke spoliators of traditional culture what they have been doing to traditional culture. If you go to the next slide, one of the key things that we were talking about is Pinocchio, public domain works. A lot of the Disney works are all in the public domain. Pinocchio, for instance, that's the slide after the come and read it slide. That is a story that was serialized in, I think, the 1880s in Italy. You could do a retelling of Pinocchio where Pinocchio and his young friends are lured off to Toyland in the original instead of Pleasure Island. And as they're rescued, Geppetto could lead the townsfolk to string up the child sex traffickers on the rampart of the castle that might look like a certain castle you're familiar with from Florida, but of course is strictly taken from the public domain source of that, which is the Neuschwanstein castle in Germany. So I mean, there's ample opportunities to take and rework those kinds of classic stories. One thing that I thought was just utterly amusing when I got my story on Fund My Comic on the next slide is there was a comic artist who was upset and angry at what Disney had done to the Little Mermaid. So he decided to turn around and tell the Little Mermaid story he wanted to tell. So he has his ginger-haired mermaid with a lot better figure than Disney's original and way more guns and violence. And, called it the Little Mermaid. And I particularly love the knife-wielding crab sidekick that she has. And I don't know anything about the story other than the art and the description that I saw on Fund My Comic. But that's an example of taking a woke art and just turning it back and doing a non-woke version of it, and letting the reader, the comic buyer, pick which one they want to read.
Okay, so this is what occurs to me on this when you're talking about it. It's like we could do this with any story, right? And the retelling of it, it's like you're right. It's like if Disney was retelling Hans Christian Andersen, we can retell the stories. Why do we get so upset? Right? And one, it's there's the we worry about who might see the story and be affected by it. Yes. We're irritated that these are the ones that everybody knows. I mean, my sort of own personal life is spending time talking about people, undoing the myths about the Middle Ages again, right? That you are, constantly fighting the version of things that becomes normative. I mean, literally in academia, whether the Dark Ages or not, but I'll have, colleagues who are just as well educated as I am, technically, right? And they've studied a lot of technical, difficult things, and they know a lot of stuff, but still ask me. I remember when Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code came out, right? And I have senior colleagues in my department coming up and asking me whether it's true. And I'm like, you're kidding, right? And, and then we can take that as amusement. It's like, well, Dan Brown made, certain kind of conspiracy theories popular and such. Are we irritated just because they make all the money? Or because they have the effect on the culture because of the spread that they get, which is, of course, then looped back into, well, they have all this money and therefore their version of it can become more normal in the sense of statistically out there than our version. And then it's like, it's easy to retell the stories and tell our better stories. So what is it that we're actually fighting and upset about?
Well, it's that you hit it earlier on when you talked about its desecration, and
that too, yeah.
Outrage. It's the outrage of seeing stories and values we hold dear being butchered and manipulated and retold in woke versions to try to lecture us and influence us to accept their woke values. It's the good, the beautiful, and the true being perverted into the bad, ugly, and false. Mm-hmm. So it's primarily the outrage issue, at least from my perspective. And a lot of the it's fascinating. We were just talking about that on Social Galactic today. It really isn't about the money. If it was about the money, Pixar would not have made a $200 million film with the first transgender Pixar characters whose pronouns are they, them, and seen it collapse at the box mm-hmm. office, and they're going to lose money on it. I mean, if you wanted to make money, you'd have told the story that the audience wants to hear. But the people who have that kind of money aren't interested in making more money telling stories the audience wants to hear. They want to spend their money trying to bombard audiences with their woke art to try to shift the culture and to try to be persuasive. And I think,
well, to be fair, we want to be persuasive with virtue and justice and things like that. That I think. Sorry, I'm listening, and then I think I've got it, and I say, carry on.
Okay, well, I was just saying that there was a time that was an effective
technique. Getting the audience what they want to hear, and this is a thing, because they're trying to make a version of things. It's like we want as Christians to get people to pay attention to us, and maybe they don't want to hear us.
There are people who do, and people who will buy art that upholds the good, the beautiful, and the true. And artists who want to create that kind of art.
I'm trying to get to a different level. So the world. This is where Draco Chemics says that the world resists the good, the beautiful, and the true. Right? The world is seductive and filled with potions and spirits, and people are drawn into it. Right? And so when you come to them and say, that life that you're leading right now with your addictions and ease and comfort and stuff, it's bad for you. They're going to hate that.
Mm. There's certainly an element to that. The bad, the ugly, and the false can be sugar coated and forced under people's noses enough that they lose the ability to tell the difference. But the other element of it is the attempt to lock up and suppress the good, the beautiful, and the true. Because I think there are a lot of people out there who, given the choice, will still choose the good, the beautiful, and the true because it resonates with them more strongly.
Okay,
and it's really kind of a.
One of the about piety in the UATV chat is saying they're not comfortable with virtue. It hurts, literally, physically hurts them.
I'm sure there's some people like that who are so corrupt that they're offended by virtue.
I think most people are, right? That's the problem of sin. And therefore it's like why we have to have mercy to be saved, because mm-hmm. most people at some point fall away, and you can find the place where you're challenged and you're going to start hissing at people yourself. One is right that there's a trigger somewhere that is going to be the thing that you won't let go of.
Well, I mean, sin and is very attractive and very appealing, and but I like to think there's still a core of good that can be appealed to in the vast crowd of people who are kind of in the middle. I mean, there are certainly people who will look at a picture of a happy couple and a child and kind of smile and say, that's nice, mm-hmm. and there are people who look at that and frown and get angry and say, there's another useless eater. I think that at least for now, the useless eater crowd is in the minority. but there's certainly an awful lot of propagandizing going on to try to push those ideas.
Well, the thing is, I think you're wrestling with this in your Wise of Heart, the degree to which you can persuade. And so I've been, we've been reading in your Substack and in the archive, and so we don't know how it's going to turn out, but we're well into the middle of the trial. And I also have some, there's some the mythology of the courtroom is incredibly powerful in American culture. It's like you say, it's a courtroom drama, but that is our myth, right? The justice will prevail in that competition between.
Well, and already you're seeing that, the judge in his rulings is, you can read between the lines and see he's playing favorites, and arguments that one side can get away with are called argumentative, and the other side is forced to stop.
Right.
So,
but in the book you're I mean, which you finished, right? So it's like you have to write a sequel. That you are in fact dealing directly with this problem of how do you persuade on one side or the other. Well,
and not to spoil the story, but of course the central...
Good wins in the end. No, wait, is this a comedy or not?
Well, I mean, anyone who has read the Hidden Truth kind of has a good idea that it's not going to end in gloom and doom. They're powerful forces, but good triumphs in one form or another in the end. But really, the interesting character, and I didn't realize this until I got into the book, but the hero, the biology teacher, Dr. Michael Andrews, the freshly minted PhD who tried to get into academia and was canceled and shut out, and ended up finding a high school teaching position was the only job he could get instead of the research science position that he dreamed of. Well, his girlfriend, who's a math teacher at the high school, is the daughter of the university president, who is the key architect behind the Gaia Act and advocate for the transgender ideology. So his girlfriend, AC, is caught in between them and thinks she can find a middle ground because she thinks Mike's just too uncompromising and too radical, but finds his independent thinking appealing because she's turned off by just colorless NPC characters around her. So she's on Mike's side, but at the same time she's on her mother's side too, and she's really the character who is caught in between, and in a sense she really became the central character for the book. Without me, she was not going to be, she was going to be a supporting character, but her struggle to navigate between her starting position of agreement with the woke ideology in broad terms and her loyalty to her mother and her mother's position is at odds with her loyalty to her boyfriend. And as the trial goes, she's really kind of the reader figure who has to be persuaded by events and has to make a decision, which side she's going to be on, because it's very clear that no compromise is possible between the...
That's effective. That's really that's strong.
She becomes the culture that we're all in now.
She does. She's emblematic of the culture. She starts off. In fact, that one colorized slide of her outside the classroom with Mike. She's starting off with her, coffee, books, and social justice T-shirt, immersed in the woke ideology, and she has to make a decision. And it was interesting for me trying to make sure that the events legitimately justified and persuaded her to make the decision that she did. So it also works out very nicely. One of the writing tricks that I like is, the traditional story, a traditional 3-act story. You have Act 1 to set up the events. You have Act 2, where you kind of play out their logical consequences. At the end of Act 2, you have to have the hero make a big decision, that climax to drive the ending of the story in Act 3. But by doing that, I ended up effectively having, a double climax book, because there was the decision that the teacher had, the hero Mike has to make, which started the action down one road, but then AC has to make another decision that turns out to be every bit as important and critical, maybe even arguably more so, that is necessary to drive the action to its final conclusion. So it worked out very nicely dramatically, being able to do that kind of double climax, where you have what's obviously a climax, but it's not over, because it's still in doubt how things are going to play out until AC makes her decision what she's going to do.
Right. This is making me, it's like talking with Chuck and talking with Rob, and now it's like that once we start talking about the way we write the drama, which is choices, then we are obviously as writers having to think through those choices ourselves. And getting, and I mean, there must be something. Saying it's woke and social justice is one thing, but getting inside of why it's wrong is another thing. And I'm not sure that I've come across anybody who's really been terrifically effective at it. Of saying, it's like, how do you manage to tangle yourself up in this argument? And it sounds to me like, I mean, because of the way you plotted it, that it's plotted on this previous test case of propaganda and use of the justice system, that you've had to wrestle through the question at a very primary level of the rhetoric and the argument.
Well, the Scopes trial gave me an amazing outline to work from for my story. In fact, I loved the trial so much that I think I overdid it in including the transcript. I've been serializing the story on ArcToons as well as on wiseofheart.substack.com. And there was just too much courtroom stuff. I ended up deleting what amounted to an entire chapter and 3 of the episodes that are on either ArcToons or Substack in the final book, because there was just too much of that courtroom stuff. But
it turned into sports reporting, where you the entire every single action they make. Yeah,
well, I wanted to depict the whole of the trial, and the first stumbling block I got to was jury selection. And the jury selection, by the time you've seen a couple of jurors and you've seen a couple of clever questions, you really don't have to see 20 people being examined to be on the juror. Just doing a representative sample of a handful of them was plenty. So I ended up truncating that down to a reasonable size. And then there was a motion to quash that there was a lot of very interesting legal wrangling over that really didn't drive the action, because it's going to go to trial anyway. So I got rid of that, and just there, it's kind of mentioned, but we don't have the extended courtroom sequences on it. But it was a fun exercise for me, because the hidden truth I wrote entirely first person from the perspective of my hero. In the Wise of Heart, I did it third person, but it was a very selective third person, because for the first half of the book, it's third person, but it's mostly from the perspective of Mike and the defense team and what they're doing and what they're saying. And the prosecution team, the advocates of transgenderism, they're kind of a mystery that we don't really understand what they're doing or their plans or their motivations. And then in the middle of the book, there's a scene where AC has a lunch with her mother and with the senator who's been called in to champion the transgender cause and lead the prosecution, where they actually sit down, they finally talk about what their motivations are and what their thinking is and what the philosophy is. And that really distills a lot of I don't know what advocates of woke ideology do behind closed doors when I'm not around, but I imagined a scene where they were getting rid of the obfuscation and the euphemisms and the attempts to obscure what they were really aiming for, and were just honest with each other and explained what they were driving at, what their goals were. And that's the start of AC being able to take a look at both sides and try to decide if that's really the side she wants to be on. And from then on out, you understand exactly what their plan is and what they're trying to do, and you have to see what decisions the characters make to.
Well, that scene you described in the diner is very powerful. It stood out in the serialization moment. It's like, oh, now I get it. So
well, that's the exact midpoint of the story. That's the point where we switch from not having a clue really what's going on in the prosecution and pro-transgender side to see here is their full agenda. And one thing in particular, I'm a little bit embarrassed that I got all the way through writing a complete book on the subject of transgenderism before I realized that, in one sense, it's kind of a red herring that's been thrown out to distract people on the right politically from other issues like the proxy war in Ukraine and the effectiveness of certain medical treatments that are controversial to name, and the processes by which winning candidates were chosen back a few years ago, and how that process was fortified. There are a lot of, and of course, oncoming plans for a great reset and central bank digital currencies and social credit scores and all of these other schemes. The transgender agenda is a good hot button issue to keep focused on that. It's certainly something that people on the left want to push, but it's not something that is crucial to their immediate short-term goals. And I think that's why you see the never Trump Republican side uniting around trying to focus on that issue. And frankly, that's probably why Fox News was willing to report the cancellation of my Kickstarter, because that's an issue that they're willing to, they and the authorized opponents, the authorized opposition on the conservative side want to push publicly. So I made sure I made that very clear in the book, that was also part of the motivation behind them. And again, I'm kind of disappointed in myself that it took writing that entire book to really realize the big picture of what was going on.
Well, that's some of why we write, and you learn as you write. And it's like it comes out that it's like we can see certain things, and I mean that's been my own experience in my scholarship, that I'll have a plan of a book, but once you get into it, if you force it, it's just what Rob was saying. If you force it into the structure that you outline to start with, it starts breaking very badly, and so I mean, good scholarship should go in the same direction as good literature. It sounds like it's like there are certain things that it's teaching you as you're doing it.
Well, I had a couple other public domain examples that I was ready to share to help inspire other storytellers. If you'd like to,
let's go. Well, I think I'm needing a little bit of a rest before we bring our last guest in and we do magic tricks. This is I did this to myself, a marathon, right? It's like we've been going for 3 hours now, and I'm clearly going to my set. It's like, oh, the seminar's over now. No, you promised that you'd do it for 5, right? So you have Winnie the Pooh retold.
Well, I was pointing out that Winnie the Pooh is public domain, and so long as you stay away from Disney trademarked elements like the characteristic red vest, you could retell Winnie the Pooh with whatever, use those characters, whatever situations you want to tell whatever story with whatever themes you want.
So what I wonder, you had another slide of all the list of the fairy tales. I wonder why is it? So we're writing our own news story, which is a challenge to promote to people, because say, oh, this fairy queen, well, it's like that, that's a winner. But that this is what Tolkien talked about. It's like stories are always retelling themselves, or Pratchett tells himself, like this retelling, which is powerful and significant. But it is interesting that this keeps coming up. It's like, can we invent are there new characters to be invented, or all the characters actually always participating in the previous characters that we've had since Gilgamesh and Isaac and Abraham, right?
Well, certainly our storytelling is, as storytellers, our storytelling is informed by the storytellers who came before us, and the stories that we have heard, and the stories that we love and that we want to emulate. I was, in my science fiction, I was profoundly influenced by Robert Heinlein's what are called his juveniles, some of his young adult stories that are very journalistic, very matter of fact, very fast-paced, very character-driven, with very strong moral conflicts and fantastic scenes. And that was a big motivation for me, particularly when I was starting out and I was reading John C. Wright. He was just coming out with Somewither at that time. And I was just blown away by the power of his descriptive prose. And I realized that, I was such an amateur compared to someone like that. That convinced me to adopt a very matter-of-fact, journalistic, let me just tell you what you need to get the story moving, and not waste any verbiage trying to spin word pictures of exotic settings. So the storytellers that we love, that we've read, certainly influence us, and we retell some of those stories. And it goes back also to what Alexander Macros said, quoting Sun Tzu, that the wise general is feeding off the enemy's resources. I think a wise author is taking advantage of and leveraging the works of those who came before him. I mean, I can say that my story, The Wise of Heart, well, it's just the Scopes monkey trial, or just Inherit the Wind with transgenderism. And you already know a huge amount of the context if you know either the history of the Scopes monkey trial, or if you've seen Inherit the Wind. If I say Inherit the Wind with transgenderism, boom, you've got the story concept in 10 seconds or less. If you're doing something that's completely novel, like The Hidden Truth, I mean, it takes me a minute or two to convey the complexity of the story, and what I'm doing, and how it works for you to understand it, because that is a more original kind of story. So if you take something that is in the public domain, that is a story everyone knows the basic elements to, and rework it, well, then your story just becomes King Arthur's court with spaceships, or it becomes the Jungle Book, but somehow you set it in the American West. Or you can take a historical example like the sinking of the Titanic.
You had that one, yeah.
Or like I did, the
monkey trial.
You don't like the heroine throwing the diamond overboard in memory of her lost lover, instead of supporting her family and giving them that untold wealth that would make their lives so much easier. Well, you retell the story your way, and it would be particularly fun if you included all of the opponents of the Federal Reserve who went down with the ship, and turned it into some kind of a cool conspiracy thriller. Or, of course, Scopes monkey trial.
I'm getting dizzy with the slides.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll just conclude my last slide. Just surveys,
do your stuff, right? All your cool stuff. I've actually shown it several times, so people can. Here we are. And the thing is, I think retelling is also the problem. It's like we reincorporate, and that reincorporation feels like revelation and understanding. This is topical to what Patrick wants to talk with us about. So I think we've reached a good place. Tell them where to find your stuff.
Well, on that last slide, I have all of the links to my various ways to contact me. I'm serializing The Wise of Heart at wiseofheart.substack.com. You'll also find it on Archaven, archaven.com. It's one of the stories serialized there. My web address is Aetherczar.com. I sponsor my book sale.
Oh, look, mugs. Very good.
Come and read it at Aetherczar.com. I'm Aetherczar on Twitter and on Gab, and I run the Etherstream channel on Telegram.
So what you said is you're well branded. You're definitely well branded.
You can find me in many places, and my story, The Wise of Heart, will be available on Amazon in a few weeks, sometime probably middle of July.
Thank you so much, Hans. This has been really helpful and inspiring. And we've watched your story and we've rooted for you. And the the Wise at Heart. The Wise at Heart is the model story of persistence.
Well, thank you. And again, I really appreciate all the support that you and the Dragon Common Room gave me going through that ordeal. It's been fun, having Dragon Common Room members read my early drafts and make comments and suggestions. And you've really built a nice community there for authors and artists and others struggling to create creative work. So, thanks for putting that together and for letting me be a part of it.
You've been a great asset, and we're very welcome. Warriors together. Dragon warriors.